Hi there. You might think that death is the end, but what if your life is only just beginning when your heart has already stopped beating? Your body lies in a cool tomb, wrapped by someone else's hands, and you're watched by eyes that belong neither to the living nor the dead. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, settle in and get comfortable. We're about to begin. You find yourself in a room so still, even your own thoughts seem too loud. There are no windows here, only shadows layered upon shadows, settling thickly across the pale stone. Your master's body, which once commanded a household, now commands only silence. You stand a little apart, as is proper, and watch the procession of the living, who treat the dead with a mixture of awe and boredom. There is something both comic and tragic about this parade of faces, about the way the servants pretend not to look at the body, yet glance every time they think no one is watching. You, of course, are always watching. You have learned that death, like a strict overseer, expects attention. Even in this cold room, you feel eyes on your back. Are they the eyes of the living? Or is it eternity itself, peering from behind the veil, sizing you up with the unblinking stare of the dead? You do not believe in ghosts, but you believe in habit. The habit of watching, the habit of waiting, the habit of whispering to yourself when you know you should be silent. Here, silence is not a virtue, it is an obligation, as heavy as the incense that curls in the air, trying and failing to mask the underlying scent of old sweat, expensive oils, and the early hints of something else, something you try not to name. It is said that the soul lingers for a while after death, confused by the change of address. Your master always hated being confused. You imagine him standing beside you now, arms crossed, brow furrowed, unimpressed with the way his body has been laid out. Is this really the best you could do? He would ask, with the sharpness that once could slice a man's pride in two. But he does not speak, not anymore. The priests begin their murmured rites, shuffling around the body with a practiced care that would almost be touching if it were not so obviously a routine. They have done this before, dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. Every gesture is measured, each word of the chant pronounced with just enough feeling to be acceptable, but not a drop more. Their eyes keep flickering to the corners of the room, to the darkness that always seems to press closer in places like this. You remember the stories told at night, how the gods watch these rituals, how the heart is weighed against a feather, how the wrong word or careless movement might offend forces more ancient than the sand itself. Yet, looking at the priests, you suspect their greatest worry is not the wrath of the gods, but the wrath of the household manager, who is even now making mental notes of who is doing their job properly. Your master's face looks different now. It is as if the features have already started to melt into something both more and less than human. The skin is waxen, the lips slightly parted as if about to issue a final command. For a moment, you are tempted to lean in and whisper, "It is over. You are free now." But you do not. The dead may be free, but the living are still bound. One of the younger servants, eyes wide with the half curious, half terrified awe of those who have never seen a dead body before, drops a tray. The clang is thunderous in this muffled chamber. The head priest frowns, but does not stop. You note how quickly everyone returns to their work, as if the interruption never happened. The dead do not care for clumsy hands, but the living will remember. The first part of the ceremony ends with a song so old, no one really knows what the words mean anymore. You listen anyway, hoping for some comfort in the melody, but find only the flat, droning echo of centuries. The room seems colder now. You look at your master one last time, half expecting him to wink at you, to let you in on the joke, but he only stares past you into a darkness you cannot yet see. You think eternity is not a place, it is a gaze. It is the way the air shifts when all eyes, living and dead, turn in your direction. You are not ready. But ready or not, you must bear witness. You have never much cared for water. It is always either too cold or too hot, or, worst of all, lukewarm, that ambiguous middle ground where nothing is certain and every sensation is a mild disappointment. Now, though, as you stand beside your master's body, water is the substance of the moment. You watch as the priests prepare bowls of it, mixing in sweet smelling oils and sharp astringents, creating a potion meant not for the living, but for the dead. The irony does not escape you. Here, water is meant to cleanse not sweat or dust or sin, but to prepare flesh for a journey with no return. The chief priest is a man of careful gestures. His hands, pale and thin as parchment, move with the precision of someone who knows there is always an audience, even if that audience is made up of ghosts, gods, or simply a bored assistant taking mental notes. With each movement, he seems to say, I am the master of this moment, the conductor of this quiet symphony. But you see his eyes dart nervously to the edges of the room, as if eternity might be peering in, unimpressed with his performance. You are told that washing the dead is a sacred duty. This sounds noble until you realize what it actually means. You are cleaning a shell, a vessel that has already begun its slow transformation into something unrecognizable. The water, warm and fragrant, is poured over your master's arms and legs, across his chest and his silent face. There is something intimate about the act, but also something deeply impersonal. The priests chant as they work, voices low and steady, reciting formulas that are supposed to keep evil at bay. You suspect the only thing they are really keeping away is boredom. Facts drift through your mind, seeking purchase. In ancient times, every drop of water used for these rituals was fetched from the sacred river, and every bowl was blessed with elaborate prayers. Now, the water comes from a common well, and the prayers are mumbled by rote, as if the gods might be satisfied with sound alone. The oils, however, remain as expensive as ever. Someone, somewhere, always makes a profit from death. You notice the way the water runs down your master's skin, forming rivulets that pool in the hollows and creases. You remember him alive, stern, dignified, never allowing even the hint of a wrinkle in his robes. Now the skin is pliant, loose, betraying the passage of time with every drip. You think, not for the first time, that the body is a poor monument. Stone endures, flesh forgets. A servant brings more linen towels, their edges frayed, and the priests begin to dry your master's body with the exaggerated care of people performing for an invisible audience. There are rules to this, as to everything. No harsh scrubbing, no sudden movements. Every touch must be gentle, reverent, as if afraid the dead might bruise. You find this oddly funny, considering what comes next. There is a moment, as the last traces of water are absorbed, and the air fills with the scent of lotus and resin, when you almost believe in what the priests are doing. Maybe, you think, there is some magic left in this ceremony. Maybe, by cleansing the body, they are scrubbing away regret and sorrow, making the flesh pure enough for the long road ahead. Then one of the priests drops a towel and curses under his breath, and the illusion is broken. Even the holiest rituals cannot escape the tyranny of small mistakes. You wonder what your master would make of this. He was not a patient man, nor particularly gentle. He prized order above all else, and here he lies, dependent on the care of men who barely remember his name. Is this how all power ends? Not with a grand gesture, but with a bath performed by strangers. The room is humid now, filled with the mingled aromas of oil, incense, and something less pleasant, something that hints at the inevitable decay awaiting beneath all this ceremony. You are acutely aware of your own skin, the way it prickles with sweat. You try not to think about what comes next, about the knife and the careful hands that will soon invade the body in ways no living person ever could. Outside, the world goes on. The sun rises, the markets open, children play in dusty courtyards. Here, time seems to stand still, suspended in the space between one ritual and the next. You realize that you are not just witnessing the washing of a body, you are watching the slow, methodical erasure of a person, the reduction of a life to a set of procedures and protocols. You feel, more than ever, the weight of eternity's gaze. It is not comforting. It is not forgiving. It is simply there, relentless and unmoved, watching as the living go through their motions, pretending that water can wash away the fact that everything ends. As the priests finish and step back, you look at your master and think, you are cleaner now than you have ever been, but you are also farther away. Each touch, each ritual draws you deeper into the domain of the dead. The water is gone, but the silence remains, heavier than ever. You breathe and wait for the next stage. Eternity waits with you. You have often wondered where the boundary lies between reverence and violation. Today, as you stand among the priests and assistants in the small, dark chamber set aside for the most delicate of operations, you realize that this question has no satisfying answer. The rituals must continue, but you cannot help noticing how the work of sacred preservation looks suspiciously like the work of butchery. The priest in charge is an old man, sharp eyed and silent, his hands steady as stone. He wields his obsidian knife with a calm that is almost inhuman, as if slicing into another's flesh is simply another step in his morning routine, no different from pouring a cup of wine or tying a sandal strap. He is assisted by two younger men, both visibly nervous, who watch his every move with the desperate concentration of students learning the only lesson that really matters. Do not be the one who makes a mistake in the presence of eternity. There is a certain choreography to the process, a grim ballet of incisions and careful extractions. The first cut is made on the left side of your master's abdomen. The priest works with a kind of mechanical grace, exposing the organs that, until yesterday, kept your master alive and, more importantly, in charge. Now, those same organs are mere obstacles to the perfection of preservation. It is a humbling thing to realize that, for all a person's power and pride, their insides look much the same as anyone else's. Your master's lungs are the first to go, drawn out with surprising gentleness. Next comes the stomach, the liver, and finally the intestines. Each organ is examined, rinsed with a mixture of palm wine and aromatic spices, and placed in its own designated bowl. The priests mutter protective spells, more out of habit than conviction. You listen for a sign that something extraordinary is happening, a flicker of the gods, a gust of cold air, a shiver down your spine, but nothing comes. The only magic here is the relentless practicality of men at work. Interesting facts intrude upon your thoughts, unbidden but persistent. You recall that the ancient Egyptians believed the heart should remain in the body, to be weighed against the feather of truth in the afterlife. It is the seat of memory, emotion, and morality, everything that makes a person unique. The brain, however, is another matter. You watch as a long, hooked instrument is inserted through your master's nostrils, stirring and dissolving the gray matter that once dreamed and feared and commanded. This is the moment everyone dreads, but it is over quickly, with a practiced efficiency that would be almost admirable if it were not so chilling. You reflect with a bitter smile that even the gods seem to have preferences. The heart is revered, protected, almost sacred. The brain is discarded, as if thoughts and dreams are disposable things. You find yourself wondering how many great men and women have been reduced to nothing more than a clean cavity and a well packed chest, their secrets swirling away with the rinse water. The work proceeds without drama, just as it has for generations. The old priest barely glances at his assistants, trusting them to keep up. You see how they exchange nervous glances, wiping sweat from their brows as they handle the glistening organs, wrapping each one in linen before placing it in a carefully labeled canopic jar. The jars themselves are small masterpieces, painted and carved to represent the four sons of Horus, guardians of the vital organs for all eternity. It is a comforting thought if you do not think about it too long. As the last organ is sealed away and the body cavity is filled with packets of natron, you sense a shift in the air. The body is lighter now, emptier in every sense. What remains on the slab is no longer the man you served, nor even a recognizable person. It is an object ready for the next stage of its long, improbable journey. You think, somewhat wryly, that you are witnessing a transformation not from life to death, but from individuality to anonymity, from my master to the mummy. Eternity, as always, is watching. You feel its gaze most keenly in this moment, cold, unblinking, neither kind nor cruel, simply present. The priests do not speak as they wipe their hands and gather their tools. The ritual is over, but the work is never done. Tomorrow, they will repeat it for someone else. The living become the dead become memory, and memory becomes dust. Only the watchers remain. You are not certain whether you are part of the ritual or merely an onlooker, but you know this: there is power in bearing witness, power, and perhaps a little fear. You hope that when your own time comes, someone will watch over you with as much care, or at least as much grim curiosity. The chamber smells now of natron and bitter herbs, the air heavy with the faintly metallic tang of blood and the sharpness of preservation. You turn away from the body, leaving the priests to their silent prayers. Behind you, your master's remains lie perfectly still, emptied of everything except the relentless gaze of eternity. It is said that every vessel is shaped by what it is meant to contain. Some are made for wine, others for oil, and a rare few for secrets. In this dim room, you watch as your master's organs, each slick, slippery, and strangely anonymous, are consigned to jars crafted with more care than most houses. This, you realize, is what awaits the mighty: to have the innermost parts of oneself sorted, sealed, and stacked like rare preserves in a tomb that smells faintly of old spices and ambition. You take a moment to admire the canopic jars themselves, for their artistry deserves at least a pause. Each is a small masterpiece of painted faience or carved limestone, topped with the head of a god. Imseti the human, Hapi the baboon, Duamutef the jackal, Kebesenuef the falcon. Four guardians, four forms, four destinies. You find it fitting, perhaps even comforting, that so much symbolism is packed into such small spaces. Yet you cannot help but think of how odd it is to measure a sieve by the dimensions of a container. The priests are nothing if not precise. The liver is first, laid with care into Imseti's jar. For safekeeping, the priest mutters, almost as if the organ might protest at being so tidily stored. Next, the lungs find their eternal home in the embrace of Hapi the baboon, who is meant to guard against suffocation in the afterlife. You reflect with dark amusement on how little comfort this must bring your master now. The stomach and intestines follow, each tucked into their respective jars, the work of hands that have learned to treat the extraordinary as routine. As the last jar is sealed, the priests recite protective spells, though their voices are flat, the syllables blurred by repetition. You wonder if these words once brimmed with power, or if they have always been a kind of magical paperwork, filed away with each departing soul. Either way, the jars stand now in a neat row, painted eyes staring out with all the wisdom of centuries. You cannot help but notice the contrast between the living and the dead in this scene. For the living, possessions are scattered, hidden, hoarded, and lost. For the dead, everything is categorized, accounted for, labeled, and locked away. Your master, who spent his life in the pursuit of more land, more coin, more favor, now has only 4 jars and the empty shell of his body. It is a kind of accounting that does not appear in any ledger, but feels final all the same. The jars themselves are strangely familiar. Their rounded bellies and heavy stoppers remind you of your mother's kitchen, of the jars she used for storing honey and pickled onions, for dates and salt and things too precious to waste. You remember how she would run her hand over each lid, whispering instructions to you about how every jar has its place and purpose. You realize now that she was not only teaching you about housekeeping, but about memory, how to preserve what matters, how to let go of what does not. Perhaps the priests are doing much the same in their own funereal way. For a moment, you imagine the afterlife as a vast, orderly pantry. Each soul arrives with their set of jars, presenting them at the gates of eternity for inspection. The gods, you suppose, are connoisseurs of good preservation, checking for signs of spoilage, mold, or haste. Those whose jars are immaculate pass through, the rest are left outside, longing for the taste of home. As the ceremony continues, the canopic jars are carried in procession to their resting place deep in the heart of the tomb. The priests move with studied gravity, the bearers of small but infinite burdens. You follow at a distance, feeling both involved and irrelevant, a bystander in a play where every prop is centuries old and the lines are never quite forgotten. Interesting facts flit through your mind, as they tend to do when the present is too heavy to bear. You recall that canopic jars were not at always so elaborate. In earlier times, simple boxes sufficed, as if the dead had not yet developed a taste for luxury. You also remember that in some eras, the jars themselves were only symbolic, with the organs packed into the body cavity, each wrapped with its own spell. Efficiency, you suppose, finds its way even into the grave. There is a faint scraping sound as the jars are set into their niches. The stone echoes, a cold and final punctuation to the day's work. The priest offers a last chant, his voice fading into the shadows. You catch yourself elbowing at the row of jars, wondering if any part of your master lingers inside them, or if they are now as empty as the masks they wear. You are left with the realization that this ritual, for all its pageantry and precision, is simply another way to say goodbye, a goodbye that tries and fails to be complete. The canopic jars will stand vigil in the darkness for 1,000 years, maybe more, long after all who knew your master are themselves dust. They will outlast empires, witness the rise and fall of dynasties, and perhaps one day find themselves unearthed by hands that do not remember your master's name. As you leave the chamber, you feel eternity watching. The jars are sealed, the organs sorted, the soul accounted for, or so the living would like to believe. You are learning, slowly, that eternity keeps its own inventory, one that is never quite as neat as ours. If there is a sound that defines eternity, you are beginning to suspect it is the faint hiss of powder pouring over flesh. In the sacred preparation room, as the first pale crystals of natron fall from the priest's hands, you realize that the process of drying out your master's body is as much an act of faith as it is chemistry. And yet, for all the elaborate prayers and flourishes, what you witness now is a slow, deliberate march towards something alarmingly final. Natron, a mineral born from the ancient beds of vanished lakes, has the look of innocence, just another powder, easily mistaken for salt or soda. But it is not for taste or cleaning that natron is prized here. Its only purpose is to desiccate, to draw out every trace of moisture from the body so that nothing remains for rot or worm. You watch as the priests, so careful in every movement, lift your master's corpse onto a slanted wooden table, the body naked, colorless, already somewhere between person and artifact. It is a strangely quiet process. The servants speak in whispers, their hands gentle as they pack natron around every limb, in every cavity and crease. The body seems to shrink before your eyes, growing lighter, smaller, even as its weight on your thoughts only increases. You recall, with a flicker of irony, how your master once demanded only the finest linens, the freshest fruit, the most attentive service. Now he has offered nothing but the simplest minerals, a mountain's worth of dust, and a promise that nothing living will ever touch him again. The drying process is both art and science, though neither would impress a modern audience. The priests know how much natron to use, never too little, lest decay sneak in, never too much, for the risk of shattering delicate skin and bone. They check the body daily, brushing away the crystals that have absorbed all they can, adding more, turning the corpse as though it were an especially precious cut of meat, being cured for an endless feast. It is, you decide, the world's slowest and least appetizing recipe. You have read, in dusty scrolls and half remembered tales, that the ancient Egyptians believed natron was the very breath of the gods, capable of purifying what could not be saved by prayer alone. Perhaps this is why the priests work with such solemn faces, even as their feet ache and their minds wander. To them, natron is both weapon and shield, proof that the living can, in small ways, defy the relentless appetite of time. There are moments during these long days of waiting and watching when you are certain the body is changing beneath its shroud of crystals. The lines of the face seem sharper, the hands more skeletal, the proud chest caved in. Yet for all these changes, there is a strange peace in the stillness. The air in the chamber is dry, so dry your own lips crack and your eyes burn. You begin to dream of water, of rain, of rivers swollen with life, anything but this endless, parching silence. You cannot help but compare this process to the way memory works. Just as natron draws out the water, leaving only the husk of what once was, so too does time strip away the warmth and color from your recollections. What remains is brittle, preserved, but never quite alive. You wonder if the priests feel the same way, if every body they preserve is a reminder of their own gradual evaporation from the world of the living. The days pass slowly. Each sunrise finds you in the same place, eyes gritty, throat tight, watching for any sign that the work is almost done. The priests keep their own counsel, offering neither comfort nor complaint. Their prayers become as dry and repetitive as the natron itself, worn down by habit into a kind of white noise. Sometimes you imagine that the very walls are watching, tallying each movement, each whispered word, as if the tomb itself is hungry for stories. You learn small facts because there is little else to do. You learn that the process of drying a body takes 40 full days, 40 sunrises and sunsets, each as pitiless as the last. You learn that even kings, once encased in natron, are indistinguishable from beggars, their identities reduced to a nameless, featureless shell. You learn that the world outside has no patience for this kind of waiting. Life presses on, loud and colorful, even as you count the hours in dust and silence. Sometimes you catch yourself speaking to your master, apologizing for the indignities of the process, or explaining each step as though he might care. You ask, quietly, if he remembers what it was like to be alive. The silence that answers is no different from the silence of the tomb, but you persist because some part of you wants to believe that something endures, even as the flesh vanishes. When at last the priests pronounce the body ready, you feel both relief and loss. The natron is brushed away, revealing a figure that is neither quite human nor fully a relic, a strange, fragile hybrid of memory and matter. Your master's skin, now shrunken and hard, gleams faintly in the lamplight. There is no sign of pain or fear, only the peace that comes from being beyond both. As the body is lifted from the table, you realize that you have come to understand something about eternity. It is not an endless span of time, but the absence of time altogether, the long, silent space where nothing changes and nothing is forgotten. The body will endure, sealed away with its secrets, but you alone will remember the sound of natron falling, the hush of dust, and the way each day grew lighter and heavier with waiting. You look one last time at your master, and then at the empty bowl of natron. The ritual is complete. The sands of time have done their work. Eternity is watching still, and you, as always, are its witness. You thought you understood the meaning of patience. 40 days spent watching natron do its slow, silent work. 40 days of dryness so complete that your lips still bear the cracks as proof. But the wrapping, this is a new lesson in waiting, a fresh exercise in the tedium of eternity. You watch as the priests prepare endless bolts of linen, stacking them in neat piles beside your master's body, now dried and as fragile as old parchment. If you counted the threads in every strip, you suspect you could calculate the age of the world itself. There is, of course, a right way and a wrong way to wrap a body for eternity, and the priests know only the right way, at least in theory. The linen must be of the finest quality, white, soft, and unblemished, its weave so tight that it whispers as it is unrolled. It must be cut into strips of the perfect width, never too wide, lest the body be bound too tightly and crack, never too narrow, lest the process drag on past sunrise. You admire the precision and the monotony, the way the priests move as if performing a dance they learned before they had words. You learn that the process is not merely practical, but deeply symbolic. Every turn of the cloth, every layer added, is a line in the prayer that will carry your master beyond the reach of decay. It is not enough to cover the body. Each finger must be wrapped individually, each toe, each limb cocooned in its own careful embrace. You imagine your master, who once barked orders at trembling servants, now helpless in the arms of anonymous hands, reduced to an object of ritual, a relic in waiting. The air is thick with the scents of resins and oils. The priests rub these into the skin before each layer, their fingers sticky with myrrh and cedar. The combination is meant to both preserve and sanctify, to build a barrier not only against the rot that gnaws at every mortal thing, but against the forgetfulness that is death's true companion. You note, with a kind of weary humor, how the same substances prized in life for their beauty and rarity are now applied so generously in death. If your master had known how much money would be spent on his final bath, you suspect he would have preferred a little less piety and a little more gold in his tomb. Wrapping a body is, paradoxically, both a private act and a public spectacle. The room fills with low voices, soft as moth wings, as each strip of linen is passed, stretched, and smoothed over the shrinking form. There are no sharp movements, no laughter or impatience. Even the youngest priest, usually given to fidgeting and sighing, falls into the rhythm of the work, as if some ancestral memory guides his hands. You wonder if all funerary rituals throughout history have felt like this, a shared trance, a collective holding of breath. You find yourself counting the layers. Some say there must be at least 20, others argue for 30 or even more. With every turn, the body becomes less recognizable, the sharp angles and lines of your master's face fading beneath the soft weight of linen. Eyes, mouth, nose, all erased in white. If you squint, you can almost imagine the form beneath as something other than human, a statue, a promise, a memory you are being asked to preserve for someone you will never meet. The priests work through the day and into the evening. Their hands are steady, their voices quiet. Occasionally, a chant is whispered, a prayer for protection or safe passage, or perhaps simply a plea for strength to finish the work before night falls. You admire their endurance and their detachment. This is not grief, but craft, not mourning, but meticulous labor. And yet, for all the ritual and repetition, there are moments of beauty. A strip of linen, passed from one pair of hands to another, seems to shimmer in the half light. The careful tucking of the fabric under the jaw, the gentle crossing of arms over the chest, these are gestures of care, perhaps the last your master will ever know. In the distance, the sound of a reed flute drifts in, thin and plaintive, like the memory of a song once heard by the living. Interesting facts lodge in your mind. You recall that linen, the gift of the flax fields, was worth more than gold in certain dynasties, that the tightness of the weave was considered a measure of both wealth and devotion, that some priests, it is whispered, would hide secret messages or spells between the layers, small insurance policies for the journey ahead. You look for such secrets now, but find only fabric and oil, the slow, inexorable wrapping of the past around the body. As the work nears its end, the priests bind the shroud with cords, tying knots meant to keep both time and thieves at bay. The mummy lies still, silent, transformed into an object both sacred and strange. Your master, once all sharp corners and quick words, is now smoothed and softened, his humanity preserved and hidden at the same time. You step back, rubbing your tired eyes, and let your gaze wander over the linen wrapped figure. The priests offer a final prayer, their words dissolving into the quiet of the chamber. You realize that for all the talk of eternity, this moment is achingly finite, a pause between one form of existence and the next, between the world of the living and the endless unknown. You have witnessed a miracle of sorts, though not the kind anyone would envy. You leave the chamber with the scent of myrrh in your hair and the memory of 100 careful hands weaving your master into history. And behind you, wrapped in linen, silent and unmoving, eternity waits and watches, patient as dust. You have lost count of the days since this began. Each hour has bled quietly into the next, blurring time until it feels like you have always been here, a silent observer pressed against the edge of history. Today, though, the pace slows even further, the air thick with a sense of purpose. The priests are preparing their amulets. Each is small, but none are insignificant. These are the final gifts to your master, and, if the old stories are to be believed, the only tools that might grant him safe passage through what comes after. The linen wrapped body lies before you, as anonymous as a package waiting to be delivered. Its human shape is disguised now by the layers of fabric and resin, the arms and legs like branches beneath snow. Around it, the priests gather, each one cradling a collection of objects in their palms. Stones, beads, bits of carved bone and bright green faience. To an outsider, it might look like a child's collection of lost treasures. But here, each piece has meaning, each one a secret weapon in the coming battle against nothingness. There is a ritual to the placing of amulets, as there is to everything in this process. The priests move with a careful choreography, sliding charms between the layers of linen, reciting half-remembered spells with voices that grow softer as the afternoon deepens. They start at the head, a scarab for resurrection, an ujat eye for protection, a djed pillar for stability. Some of these shapes you recognize from market stalls and jewelry boxes, but their power is supposed to be different now. These are not for ornament, but for defense. You watch the high priest as he selects a slender figure of a goddess, arms outstretched, the detail faded by countless hands. He presses it against your master's heart, whispering a phrase you do not catch. Perhaps it is a plea for mercy or a command. In the flickering lamplight, The goddess's face seems almost alive. You wonder if your master, who scoffed at superstition, would be amused or offended to find his soul entrusted to so many silent guardians. There are spells, too, written on linen strips and tucked between the wrappings. Some are little more than fragments, syllables so ancient that even the priests do not know what they mean. Others are lengthy, confident in their promises. Let this one walk in sunlight. Let this one's heart be light. Let this one not be devoured by the waiting darkness. The priests murmur these as they work, sometimes with conviction, sometimes out of habit. You listen, trying to imagine a world in which words alone might hold back eternity. Interesting facts crowd your thoughts. You know that in some dynasties, amulets were chosen by wealth, not by need. Golden flies for courage, tiny crocodiles for strength, obsidian knives for defense. In poorer tombs, the amulets are little more than mud, shaped by trembling fingers. The principle, though, is the same. When all else fails, when the body is lost and the name forgotten, perhaps the shape of hope, pressed close to the heart, can make the difference between annihilation and remembrance. The work is slow, delicate. You see the care with which the youngest priest places an amulet shaped like a frog. For rebirth, he says, his voice shaking. Another slips a small papyrus scroll beneath the wrappings at the throat, nodding with satisfaction. To you, it seems an odd way to face eternity, armed with trinkets, defended by fragile words. But you remind yourself that these are not simply objects. Each is a memory, a wish, a thread tying the dead back to the living. Your master, for all his certainty in life, placed his trust in gold and muscle, in debts owed and favors granted. Now, he must trust in a handful of stones and the faith of men he never knew. You wonder if eternity laughs at this reversal, or if, perhaps, the gods are more easily bribed than the living. The priests continue, layering spells and amulets until the mummy is not only swaddled in linen, but armored in hope and fear. The silence grows thick around you, broken only by the soft rustle of cloth and the whispered cadence of old prayers. You feel, as you so often have, the weight of eternity's gaze, a gaze that is patient, cold, and never quite satisfied. Sometimes, as you watch, you are struck by the absurdity of it all. So much energy, so many treasures spent in the desperate hope that oblivion might be outwitted by ritual and charm. You wonder if, in the end, it makes any difference. Then you remember that the alternative is to do nothing, to surrender without even the dignity of a last defense. Faced with that, even a string of beads or a broken amulet seems worthwhile. The final amulet, a heart scarab inscribed with words so tiny you cannot read them, is pressed firmly into the mummy's chest. The high priest speaks a final invocation, his voice barely more than a breath. You feel something shift, as if the air itself has grown heavier. The last spell is finished. The last hope is in place. You stand back, dizzy with the sense of resin and oil, watching as the priests bow their heads. The ritual is almost complete. Your master lies hidden beneath linen and amulets, spells woven as tightly as cloth, every weakness shielded by the magic of centuries. For the first time, you feel a glimmer of respect for these ancient gestures. Against oblivion, even superstition is a kind of courage. You step out of the chamber, leaving the priests and their secrets behind. You know now that the fight against forgetting is older than any kingdom, and that each generation must find its own talismans. The world outside seems brighter, harsher, but you carry the scent of incense and the memory of whispered spells with you, another layer of protection, however thin, against the emptiness that waits for everyone. And in the cool stone corridors of the tomb, eternity watches, amused and unmoved as always. You have never seen so much linen in your life. Even after days of wrapping and rewrapping, after the careful binding of each finger, each toe, each unremarkable part of a body, now considered more precious in death than in life, there remain great heaps of it stacked against the walls. If you listen, you can almost hear the cloth sigh as it's unspooled, as though it too is weary from this endless service to the dead. This linen is not just fabric, it is a statement, an inheritance, a currency, and, most of all, a barrier. It is said that the finest linen, spun from the flax that grows in the blackest river mud, will outlast even the memory of the one it covers. You wonder if your master would have taken pride in that fact, or if he would have demanded more, always more, more layers, more luxury, more proof that even in death he refused to settle for anything less than the best. The priests measure and cut with almost religious reverence. Some strips are narrow and delicate, reserved for the face and hands, where the features must be preserved as long as possible. Others are broad, meant for the chest and limbs, where bulk is needed to transform flesh into artifact. They work quickly, but never carelessly, every wrinkle smoothed, every fold aligned. When a piece is not perfect, it is discarded without hesitation, left to pile up with the others that failed to meet the impossible standards set for those who are meant to last forever. Interesting facts crowd your mind because you cannot help yourself. Linen was once so precious that it was used as currency, sometimes even as a form of tax payment. The number of threads in a single square of cloth could determine the worth of an estate. In certain dynasties, a linen shroud was more eagerly guarded than a jewel. It is said that kings were buried in linen so fine it shimmered in the darkness, proof that wealth could shine even where the sun never reached. You watch as each layer is anointed with oils, cedar, myrrh, frankincense, scents so dense they seem to thicken the very air. The linen absorbs these perfumes greedily, growing heavier, richer. The combination is meant to ward off decay, but you sense that the priests are as concerned with appearances as they are with function. The dead must look and smell like nobility, even in their long sleep. You remember the old stories about linen, the way your grandmother would point to her only good robe and say, "This will last longer than you, child." She was not wrong. Even now, scraps of ancient shrouds have surfaced from the sand, their patterns stubbornly resisting the passage of centuries. Cloth outlives flesh. Fabric preserves what skin cannot. You wonder if, centuries from now, some curious hands will unroll your master's wrappings and marvel not at his bones, but at the weave of his shroud. The priests whisper among themselves, sometimes about the quality of the linen, sometimes about the family who purchased it, sometimes, when they think you are not listening, about the folly of it all. What good is such expense for a man who cannot feel it? One mutters. Another shrugs. It is not for him. It is for us, for those who watch and remember. You file this away with all the other facts you cannot share, another thread in your private tapestry of observation. The process becomes hypnotic, layer upon layer, each strip folded and smoothed, each knot tied with practiced care. You lose track of time, lulled by the rhythm, the soft rustling of fabric, the muted prayers spoken like spells against forgetting. Sometimes you catch the priests tracing patterns on the linen with their fingertips, as though hoping to leave a final message that only eternity might decipher. You notice, too, how the light shifts in the chamber as the wrapping nears completion. The sun slants through a high, narrow window, turning the linen gold, then red, then the pale blue of early dusk. Shadows gather in the corners, lingering on the untouched bolts of cloth, the discarded strips that will never know the touch of a king. In these quiet moments, you think about the true purpose of all this splendor. Is it really for protection, or is it a kind of armor, a defense against the nothingness that waits just beyond the tomb's heavy door? You suspect the answer is both. Linen does not just preserve, it hides. It softens the edges of loss, muffles the echo of absence, and promises, however briefly, that the shape of a man can be kept safe from the jaws of oblivion. You look at the final layers, so smooth and perfect, and understand that what you are witnessing is not simply a burial, but an act of defiance against rot, against time, against the hunger of the sand. When at last the wrapping is finished, the priests step back, eyes tired, hands raw and sticky with resin. Your master lies motionless, encased in splendor, neither fully human nor fully gone. The linen gleams in the last rays of sunlight, radiant as the wings of a moth pressed between pages. There is silence, but it is not empty. It is the quiet of things completed, of tasks done as well as they could be done. You realize that you have witnessed something rare, not the defeat of death, but a temporary reprieve. The linen will hold for a while. The scent of cedar will linger, and the memory of these careful hands will last a little longer in the minds of those who watched. Beyond the walls, eternity still waits. But for now, the cloth endures, and you, ever the observer, have learned to find comfort in the stubbornness of things that do not wish to fade. You step from the chamber, the ghost of linen still clinging to your skin, and know that centuries from now, someone else will stand where you are standing, marveling not at your master, but at the cloth that dared to last. It is a curious thing, you realize, how so much effort has gone into hiding your master, wrapping him in linen, smearing him in resins, encasing his heart in amulets and spells, only for everyone to suddenly become obsessed with making sure he is seen. Not as he is now, of course, all sharp bones and shrinking flesh, but as he once wished to be remembered, dignified, resolute, unmistakable. This, you are told, is the purpose of the mask. The mask is not begun in haste. It is planned, debated, sketched in charcoal, and scratched on wax tablets by the artisan's clever hands. Priests and relatives argue in low, urgent voices. Should the nose be straight or aquiline? Should the lips smile faintly or be stern? Should the eyes be wide in welcome or narrow in judgment? Each detail is a memory struggling against the slow erosion of time. You cannot help but feel the irony. No one argued so carefully over his face in life. You watch as the mask takes form. First, there is a cast made of plaster, smoothed over the linen wrapped features, catching the last subtle curves of a face that is already more memory than flesh. The mask itself will be of cartonnage, linen soaked in glue, shaped, pressed, and left to harden in the shape of eternity's chosen likeness. Into this rigid shell, the artisans press layer after layer, building a structure that is part armor, part portrait, part promise. Paint comes next, blues and reds for the gods, gold for the skin, obsidian for the lined kohl of the eyes. If the family can afford it, and your master always could, the mask will be gilded, the thinnest sheets of hammered gold pressed onto cheeks and brow, each wrinkle and dimple hidden beneath an idealized sheen. The artisans hum as they work, flicking dust from their sleeves and sometimes pausing to admire their own handiwork. He looks better this way, one murmurs, and the others laugh, quiet and a little nervous. You think about masks, how everyone wears them, even among the living, smiles for the masters, frowns for the servants, careful blankness for the moments between. The funerary mask, though, is a final, permanent mask. It is the only face that will last longer than the person who inspired it. You wonder if your master, so concerned with dignity and legacy, would have found comfort in this, or if he would have torn it off, seeking something more honest. Interesting facts distract you from your own unease. You recall that the mask is meant to help the soul recognize itself in the afterlife, to ensure that the K, the essential self, does not wander lost among strangers. Some masks are inscribed with spells or the owner's name, others with elaborate scenes of feasting and victory. The more elaborate the mask, the greater the hope that eternity will be impressed and perhaps merciful. The priests, meanwhile, perform their own small rituals. They murmur prayers to the gods of the underworld, asking that the mask's eyes might see, its lips might speak, its ears might hear the songs of welcome in the field of reeds. Sometimes the priests seem almost childlike, as if they are making a doll rather than a guardian for the next world. You realize how fragile their hope is. All this effort for a chance, just a chance, that something of your master will survive where no living voice can follow. The day the mask is finished, the artisans bring it into the burial chamber with reverence. The air is heavy with the scent of glue and paint, and something more difficult to name, a kind of anticipation as if everyone is waiting for the mask to blink, to speak, to prove the power of its own image. It does not, of course. It is only a mask. But when it is gently placed over your master's face, sealing him in for good, the effect is undeniable. He is no longer a body or even a mummy, but something between human and divine, frozen in a moment that will last as long as the tomb itself. You study the mask. It is beautiful, yes, but also unsettling. The eyes are too open, too bright. The lips are fixed in an expression that you do not quite recognize. It is your master and not your master, familiar, yet wholly apart from the real man whose voice once echoed through these halls. You realize this is the point. The mask is a compromise between memory and myth, a way of smoothing out all the rough edges, all the failures and cruelties, all the petty triumphs and secret shames. There is a kind of loneliness in the mask, you think. It has no need for sleep or food or affection. It will never laugh at a joke or scowl at a mistake. Its only purpose is to endure, to look out from its place in the dark and remind eternity that once this person mattered enough to be remembered. The priests finish their incantations. The family files through for a final private viewing. Some weep, some bow, some simply stare, unable to look away. You stay until the end, until the flickering torchlight begins to die and the shadows pool at the edges of the chamber. In that half light, the mask's eyes seem almost to follow you, their gaze steady and unblinking, as if eternity itself has learned to wear a human face. You step outside, the echo of the mask imprinted on your thoughts. You realize that this is how most of us are remembered in the end, not for who we were, but for the stories and shapes left behind by those who loved, feared, or simply outlived us. The mask is a promise that something endures, even if only the image. The doors close on the burial chamber. The mask gleams in the dark, untouched by time, watched only by dust and silence. You understand now what it means to be seen by eternity, not as you are, but as you are imagined, sculpted, gilded, and finally set free from the frailty of the flesh. It is nearly over, though it feels as if it will never truly end. The chamber is dim, torches flickering in alcoves, shadows shifting over painted walls, and golden offerings. Your master, encased in linen, armored with amulets, crowned by a mask both regal and unblinking, lies at the center of a circle of priests. Their robes are newly washed, their faces set into the careful neutrality that comes only from years of practice. Even you, by now, have learned how to watch without emotion, how to make your face a mask to match the one that will soon watch for all eternity. The final rituals are for the gods and for the living who must let go. The priests move in a slow, practiced circuit, sprinkling scented water, dusting the body with soft powders, and waving censers heavy with frankincense. Smoke curls upward, mingling with the stale air, drawing your eyes into patterns that vanish as soon as you try to understand them. The chanting, though, is the heart of the moment, droning and relentless, the same lines repeated again and again, their meaning worn smooth by centuries of repetition. If you listen closely, you can hear fatigue in the voices of the priests. Their intonations slip a little, syllables blurring, some words pronounced by habit rather than conviction. Yet there is comfort in this too. The dead are honored by tradition, not by innovation. The gods, you suspect, are far more tolerant of boredom than of mistakes. You stand at the edge, half invisible, watching. You know now that these prayers are not really meant for your master, nor even for the gods, but for those left behind. They are words meant to fill the impossible silence, to soften the blow of final separation. The prayers are slow and heavy, like honey poured in winter. Sometimes the priests glance at each other, checking the pace, making sure no one gets ahead. Eternity, it turns out, must be approached in order. Facts crowd your mind, unbidden as always. You remember reading that these rituals have changed little in 2,000 years. The words spoken to Osiris and Anubis, the gestures with which the mouth and eyes are symbolically opened to let the dead see and speak in the next world. The tools, a little bronze adze, a carved wand of sycamore, have not changed either, as if to remind everyone that innovation is for the living, not the dead. At last, the high priest steps forward, holding a tiny jar of sacred oil. He daubs a drop on the lips of the mask, murmuring the opening of the mouth, a spell so old that no one is quite sure if it is a command, a plea, or a warning. You find yourself holding your breath, half expecting the lips to part, a word to emerge, some final command from the man who once never ran out of things to say. But there is only silence. The oil gleams, then sinks into the painted surface, leaving no trace. There are other rites, each one more symbolic than the last. A feather is placed beside the heart, a tiny loaf of bread in the hand, a miniature boat set at the feet, each a tool or token meant to smooth the soul's passage. The priests chant for safe travel, for gentle winds and open gates. Their words are meant to keep danger at bay, to persuade the monsters of the next world that this one deserves to pass untroubled. You have learned by now that there is a comfort in such repetition. Each phrase, each gesture, a way to resist the finality of loss. You remember your own first funeral, how the prayers seemed to form a wall against grief, something for the heart to lean on while the mind struggled to understand. Now, as you watch these last rites, you wonder if the wall is really meant to keep sorrow out, or simply to keep the living from following too soon. The family gathers, shuffling forward for their last farewell. Some sob, clutching at each other, their tears the only honest sound in the chamber. Others stand stiff and silent, lips pressed tight, staring at the gilded mask as if hoping it might blink. A few look only at the floor, as if the stone itself holds the answers. You watch them all, feeling strangely detached, as if this is a story that will keep repeating, no matter who lies at the center. As the last words fade, the priests draw away, hands folded in their sleeves, eyes lowered. The family lingers for a moment, each one taking a private leave, whispered or wordless. No one rushes. The end, it seems, must be allowed to take its own time. There is a final offering, a basket of bread and fruit, a jug of beer, a lock of hair tied with ribbon. Each is set at the foot of the body, a small rebellion against the hunger of the grave. You know, as do all who watch, that these gifts will not last. The ants will come, the mold will spread, the years will do their quiet work, but the gesture matters. It is a reminder that love and memory persist, if only in token form. When it is finally done, a hush settles over the chamber. The priests have withdrawn, the family has left, and only you remain. The torchlight flickers, shadows gather, and the scent of incense clings to your skin. You look at your master, at the mask that will never change, at the linen and the offerings and the silence that fills the room. You realize that the final ritual was never really for the dead at all. It was for you, for the watcher, for the one who must carry the memory forward. In that silence, eternity looks at you with the eyes of the mask, and you, just for a moment, dare to look back. The world outside is brighter than you remember. For a moment, sunlight stings your eyes, and the sounds of the city, distant bells, the bark of vendors, the laughter of children, seem so loud they could shatter stone. It is a rude reminder that life continues, heedless and bustling, even as you prepare to descend with your master into the belly of the earth. The living always hurry, the dead are patient. Today is the day of the final journey. The priests have finished their prayers. The family has withdrawn, their grief left folded in corners and tucked into pockets. Now the procession forms, a slow river of bodies moving through the courtyard, then down the sloping path that leads to the tomb's yawning entrance. You follow, close enough to feel the press of sorrow and duty, but never close enough to be truly seen. The air grows cooler, each footstep sending up little puffs of dust from the ancient flagstones. The tomb itself is cut into the bedrock, a wound in the earth sealed by time and faith. At the mouth of the passage, bearers wait, their faces blank as they shoulder the burden of your master's body. The coffin is heavy, but the ritual insists on gravity. Each movement is careful, deliberate, as if hurrying might offend the dead or alert the lurking gods. You watch as the coffin disappears into shadow, the bearers straining at the weight of both wood and expectation. The passage narrows, walls close in, torches flicker, and the air grows thick with the scent of old dust and fresh incense. You trail behind, counting your steps, half afraid of losing yourself in this labyrinth where every stone has a story, every turn an echo. It is said that the dead travel through the underworld as through a house with 1,000 rooms, doors to be opened, traps to be avoided, guardians to be bribed or begged. In this sense, you are all trespassers, walking roads meant for those who will never walk again. The journey is slow, and time becomes a heavy, physical thing. You imagine yourself shrinking, each step a subtraction, until you are little more than a shadow pressed against the wall. The priests murmur instructions to one another, their voices soft as moth wings. Careful, says one, do not bump the walls. Watch the turn, says another. The slope is steep here. Every caution is a ritual, every warning a spell against disaster. You try to remember the stories told to you as a child, that the dead are guided through the darkness by the light of memory, that a wrong step can send a soul tumbling into oblivion. You picture your master, proud and impatient, forced at last to wait his turn in the queue for the afterlife. Even here, among stone and silence, you cannot help but hear his voice. Move along, there is work to be done. You smile despite yourself and whisper back, patience, my lord. Eternity is not going anywhere. The tomb deepens, the air grows colder. The flicker of torches paints monstrous shapes on the walls: jaguars, serpents, men with the heads of birds or jackals. Some are painted, some carved, all intended to frighten or impress the wandering soul. You wonder how many people have passed through these halls, how many feet have worn down these stones, how many tears have stained this floor. The weight of memory is almost unbearable, heavier than the coffin itself. At last, the passage opens into the burial chamber. It is not large, but it is grand in its way. The walls are painted with scenes of the next world, fields of gold, blue rivers, feasts that never end. The ceiling is a sky of stars, some faded, some still bright as new. In the center, a stone platform waits, the bed for your master's last, longest sleep. The bearers set the coffin down with a grunt, their task nearly done. Now comes the final placement. The priests arrange the coffin, align it with the painted north, mutter spells to guard against evil. You are told that the orientation matters, that the soul must face the right direction to find its way in the dark. You marvel at this confidence, this insistence that even in the face of the unknown, the dead can be guided by the careful hands of the living. There are offerings, of course, baskets of fruit, jars of wine, little carved animals, and furniture so small it could fit in a child's hand. Each is a promise: food for the journey, comfort in the cold, company in the emptiness. You place a single flower at the foot of the coffin, unsure why. Perhaps out of habit, or superstition, or simple hope. The priests notice but say nothing. In this place, even small gestures have meaning. You stand back as the family enters for their final moment. Some cry, some pray, some just look and look, as if trying to memorize every line of a mask that will soon vanish behind stone and shadow. You wonder if they will remember this day, or if, like all things, it will be worn smooth by time, a memory too soft to hold its shape. At last, the priest's signal, the chamber must be sealed. The family leaves, led by trembling hands and wet eyes. The priests begin to chant again, their voices low and endless, as they move to close the heavy stone door. You step out into the passage, feeling the cool draft that marks the boundary between worlds. You glance back, one last time, and see only darkness, painted gold by torchlight, waiting for memory to fade. The tomb is quiet now. The world above continues, indifferent and loud. But here, beneath stone and sand, a different kind of time unfolds, one measured not in hours or years, but in patience, waiting, and the silent passage of souls. You realize, as you climb the long slope back to the living, that you too have journeyed between worlds. You have seen what waits in the darkness, and know, with a certainty as cold as stone, that eternity is always watching, always waiting, always ready to welcome the next traveler home. If you had to choose a single word for the tomb's walls, it would be crowded. Not with people, for the living rarely linger here, but with stories, images layered thick as the darkness, pressed into every inch of stone by hands that knew they would never see the sun again. You have always thought of history as something written in books or recited by elders on cold evenings. Here, it is painted in color, inked in soot and mineral, sealed under a film of fine dust that time cannot quite erase. You wander the burial chamber while the priests finish their final muttered spells. Your footsteps echo, oddly loud against the hush, and you try not to disturb the painted figures gazing at you from the walls. They are old, but their eyes are sharp. In this place, you suspect, every watcher is also being watched. There is a sequence to the pictures, a logic even if you do not fully understand it. Nearest the door, the images are of the living, your master seated at a feast, hands raised in blessing or command, surrounded by servants who look suspiciously like the ones now shuffling in the hallway outside. There is a certain comfort in the familiar, faces painted in careful profile, smiles as thin and fragile as the plaster itself. Here is the master's wife, painted so much younger than she is today. Here are his children, all perfectly behaved, none ever aging or dying, frozen in the first act of a play that never ends. The further into the tomb you go, the stranger the pictures become. There are boats, so many boats, each one crowded with the dead and their belongings, each sailing a river that gleams like silver in the lamplight. You remember being told, as a child, that the journey to the afterlife is by water, that the soul must sail through darkness before it can reach the fields of eternity. In one panel, your master stands on the prow, arms wide, a smile so broad and empty that you can almost hear him call for more wine, more music, more life. There are gods everywhere, some with animal heads, some with wings, some so monstrous you cannot decide if they are meant to protect or terrify. You recognize Osiris, green-skinned and serene, holding the crook and flail. You see Anubis, jackal-faced, weighing hearts on golden scales. You even spot Thoth, with his long beak and unfathomable eyes, recording every deed for judgment. The gods are larger than the people around them, their arms stretching across whole sections of wall, their gaze impassive and relentless. You pause in front of one particular scene, your master, kneeling before a goddess whose name you do not know. Her hands are raised in both welcome and warning, her eyes alive with the suggestion that she knows more than she will ever say. The artist has painted her jewelry in bright blue and red, colors that have not faded despite centuries of darkness. You wonder how many prayers were whispered to her, how many hopes clung to her painted smile. The tomb's walls are not just beautiful, they are instructional, a user's manual for the afterlife. There are tiny scenes of servants baking bread, brewing beer, tending livestock, planting fields. In the next world, your master will want for nothing. Every need is anticipated, every comfort arranged by brush and pigment. You feel a pang of envy for the certainty of it all. If only the living could order happiness so easily. There are mistakes, too, and these interest you most. A servant painted with two right hands, a sheep lopsided and oddly blue, a column of hieroglyphs that trails off into nothing, abandoned mid spell. You wonder if the artist was simply tired, or if he knew that perfection was wasted on the dead. Perhaps a flaw was necessary, a way of marking the work as human, as if to say, we were here, we tried. Interesting facts stack up in your mind. The pigments come from crushed stones and minerals, malachite for green, ochre for red, lapis for the richest blue. Egg yolk, oil, even blood were sometimes mixed into the paint. The most expensive color was blue, and you count how many times it appears, a silent testament to your master's wealth. The walls are sealed with a thin layer of resin, meant to keep out moisture and the touch of hungry insects. Still, nothing lasts forever. Even here, time nibbles away at beauty, one flake at a time. You trace a finger near, but never on, the edge of a scene where the master steps through a great golden gate, welcomed by ancestors and gods alike. Above the scene, someone has written a blessing in ink so dark it seems to have absorbed all the sorrow in the world. You do not read the words aloud. Some things are meant to be kept secret, even from eternity. As the priests begin to gather their things, preparing to seal the tomb, you take one last, lingering walk around the room. You try to memorize each face, each gesture, knowing that soon enough, darkness will settle and the colors will fade further. You imagine future eyes, perhaps centuries from now, marveling at these same pictures, puzzling over the lives they depict, trying to piece together what mattered in a world long gone. You realize that the paintings are not just for the dead, but for those who come after, a message sent forward, like a bottle thrown into the endless sea of time. We were here, they say, again and again. We mattered, we loved, we feared, we prepared. You feel, for a moment, the weight and comfort of continuity, a reassurance that, while all things end, the story continues, painted in stubborn color on the face of oblivion. The torches dim. The last priest pauses in the doorway, glancing back as if to check that nothing has been left undone. You stand in the hush, surrounded by pictures that have seen more funerals than any living soul, and for just a breath, you are certain that the eyes in the walls are watching you, recording your presence, adding your shadow to their gallery of eternity. You have always thought of endings as abrupt things, a door closed, a candle snuffed, a final word hanging in air. But the end of this ritual, the moment when your master is truly gone from the world of the living, unfolds as slowly as dusk, slipping from light to dark with agonizing patience. It is a kind of choreography, each step deliberate, each movement echoing not just tradition, but something older, heavier, the ancient burden of saying goodbye. The chamber has grown colder. Torches burn low, the last orange flames flickering against the painted faces on the walls, their gazes growing hollow as shadows lengthen. You stand just inside the doorway, barely daring to breathe, as the priests take their places around the coffin. The final prayers are whispered now, each syllable drawn out until it becomes indistinguishable from the silence. There is nothing left to be said, but the words come anyway. Rituals are stubborn that way, resisting the void with repetition. The moment arrives, the stone lid is hoisted, impossibly heavy, grinding across the top of the sarcophagus with a sound that belongs more to the earth than to human ears. The priests strain, their hands dusty, their faces tense. You feel the weight in your own chest, a pressure that does not ease even as the lid settles into place with a muffled, irrevocable thud. The coffin is sealed. There will be no more looking, no more fixing, no more second chances. There is a sense of expectation in the air, as if the darkness itself is holding its breath, waiting to see if anyone dares to speak. But no one does. Instead, the priests step back, their work almost finished, and begin the slow process of sealing the chamber. Large blocks of limestone, carved to fit, are pushed into the doorway. Each one lands with a hollow echo, the sound bouncing off the painted walls and vanishing into the void. It is not a quick process. The stones are heavy, and the mortar must be carefully packed into each crack and seam. The priests work in silence, occasionally pausing to catch their breath or wipe sweat from their brows. You find yourself staring at their hands, how steady they are, how practiced. It occurs to you that this, too, is an act of faith, trusting that what you seal away will remain undisturbed, that darkness is strong enough to keep memories safe. You wonder, as the last stones are pushed into place, what your master would have thought of this ending. He always liked to be in control, to have the last word, to make sure everyone knew their role. Now, all that remains is silence, the rules of the living replaced by the impenetrable laws of stone and night. The mask, the amulets, the linen, none of them matter now. The only thing that endures is the darkness, absolute and unbroken. It is a darkness that feels alive, thick with secrets and old sorrows. You imagine your master lying within it, his face frozen in gold, his heart encased in spells, waiting for a dawn that will never come. You realize that this is what all the rituals, all the prayers, all the careful preparations were meant to resist. The sheer, unanswerable finality of the dark. The Egyptians called it Duat, the realm of shadows, the place where the dead must travel alone. Interesting facts flicker in your mind like sparks in the gloom. You recall that the burial chamber was sometimes filled with traps, hidden stones, cursed spells, tiny blades meant to slice the hands of thieves. The darkness was not just a void, but an active defender, an accomplice in keeping secrets safe. Yet, nothing lasts forever. Stones crack, walls crumble. Sooner or later, light will find its way in, and the dark will retreat, hissing and reluctant. The last stone is set in place. The priests step back, exhausted, their faces pale in the flickering light. They say a final blessing, the words barely louder than breath, and one by one they file out of the tomb, leaving you alone in the antechamber. You hear the heavy grinding of the outer doors, the thud as they fall shut, and then, for the first time, true silence descends. You are not afraid, not exactly, but you feel the weight of centuries pressing down, the realization that this place is not just for the dead, but for the memory of the dead, the half-life of story and legend that waits in the dark, hoping for a voice. You think of all those who have gone before, all those who will come after, each sealed away with the same hope that someone, somewhere, will remember. The torch sputters, its light shrinking until the walls are no longer visible. For a moment, you close your eyes, breathing in the mingled scents of dust, oil, and something colder, a scent without name or form. You understand, suddenly, that the burial is not just an ending, but a beginning, the start of a new story told only to the dark. You step back, pressing your hand to the cold stone, feeling its roughness beneath your skin. You whisper a word you do not remember learning, a goodbye, or perhaps a promise, and then you turn, walking up the winding passage toward the faintest trace of daylight, leaving your master to the company of shadows. Behind you, the chamber settles into its long sleep. The mask stares blindly. The linen rustles with the memory of hands. The paintings fade into quiet. The darkness is patient. It does not hurry. It will wait 1,000 years and 1,000 more for the sound of a voice, the glimmer of a torch, the echo of a name. And you, marked by this darkness, carry it with you as you step back into the world of the living, knowing, at last, what it means to be truly watched by eternity. There is an odd quiet that follows a burial, a hush that is not quite peace and not quite absence. It fills every chamber of the tomb, settling over the painted walls and the sealed sarcophagus, gathering in the empty corners like a patient animal waiting for something to happen. For the first time in weeks, there are no priests chanting, no relatives weeping, no servants bustling about with baskets of offerings and bolts of linen. Even the dust seems to have decided that it has nowhere to go. You stand on the threshold, listening, as if expecting the darkness to finally speak. The silence is not as empty as you expected. It has its own texture, woven from the memory of voices and footsteps, of the scrape of stone, and the faint, persistent echo of prayers, repeated until they lost all meaning. You try to remember the details, the words spoken, the gestures made, the subtle tremors in the priests' voices when they thought no one was listening. Already, the specifics are blurring, fading into the same soft shadow that seems to fill the tomb. Memory, you realize, is not immune to the darkness. It too can be buried. You wonder what happens now. In the old stories, this is the moment when the soul begins its journey, stepping from the world of the living into a landscape shaped by memory and desire, by fears and unfinished business. Your master, so proud and so careful in life, now lies wrapped and masked and silent, waiting for the magic to begin. You imagine him restless, tapping impatiently against the stone from the inside, ready to command his fate as he always did. But the tomb is silent, the stone implacable. If there is a miracle coming, it hides its arrival well. Interesting facts gather in your mind, unbidden as always. You remember that some believed the dead must linger for a time, hovering near the body, uncertain and half blind, adjusting to the new rules of their existence. The tomb was never just a resting place, but a kind of waiting room, a liminal space where the soul might encounter gods or monsters, lost loved ones, or simply itself. The Egyptians gave this in between state a name, but you forget it now, lost in the thick hush. Perhaps it is better not to know. Outside, the world moves on. The sun climbs, then falls. Wind scours the desert. The city's noise ebbs and flows in distant, comforting waves. Here, nothing changes. The silence is so complete that you can hear the faintest sounds, your own breath, the settling of stone, the minute ticking of sand as it finds its way through cracks in the mortar. Sometimes you think you hear footsteps behind you, or the soft brush of linen, but when you turn, there is nothing. The tomb is a world unto itself, suspended between heartbeat and eternity. You try to fill the silence with memories, piecing together what you can recall of your master's life. The way he frowned when displeased, the precise gesture with which he dismissed a servant, the rare glimmer of warmth that surfaced only in private. You remember the sharpness of his voice, the weight of his expectation, the moments, few but real, when he seemed almost afraid of his own power. Now none of it matters. The tomb has no interest in personality. Here, all are equal, all are silent, all are waiting. You think of the miracles promised by the rituals, the awakening of the soul, the opening of secret gates, the journey across dark waters guided by spells and amulets. The priests claimed that the body's careful preservation would trick time, that the magic of names and images and charms could outwit the hunger of oblivion. Yet, standing here, you sense how fragile those promises are, how easily hope is swallowed by stone and dark. You find yourself whispering a prayer, not to the old gods, but to the silence itself. If miracles come, let them be gentle. Let them leave the dead untroubled. The longer you wait, the more the silence feels like a test. Each minute stretches, then snaps, replaced by the next. You begin to notice tiny changes. A faint draft that lifts the edge of a shroud, a single grain of sand tumbling down a painted wall, the sudden chill when a cloud passes overhead and the thin shaft of light disappears. These are not miracles, but they are the only signs you are given. You watch and wait, measuring time not in hours or days, but in shifts of shadow and breath. Sometimes you imagine that the dead are whispering to each other, sharing secrets in a language you cannot understand. Perhaps they compare notes on the living, or recount dreams they had forgotten until this long, patient pause. Perhaps they remember you, a quiet watcher, half shadow yourself, standing guard at the edge of their sleep. If they do, they give no sign. The silence remains. You are struck by the realization that this waiting is a kind of ritual too, an unspoken acknowledgement that the work of mourning never really ends. The living must linger at the threshold, keeping watch not just for miracles, but for the moment when the world feels solid again. You remember now, from your own childhood, the way grief could shape a room, holding everyone in its quiet grip until, slowly, the silence broke and life resumed. Here, in the tomb, there is no such release. The silence will last as long as stone endures. At last, you step back from the threshold, leaving your master to his long vigil. The tomb closes behind you, the last whisper of air sliding into place like a final word. Outside, the world resumes its rush. You join it, carrying with you the weight of waiting, the memory of silence, and the uneasy knowledge that miracles are rare and, when they come, rarely announced. But behind you, in the sealed darkness, the silence watches, patient as ever. And you know that for as long as memory persists, you will always listen for a miracle that might never come. You have often wondered what comes after the silence, what your master is meant to find on the other side of stone and shadow. The priests spoke of it with such confidence, the afterlife, the field of reeds, a paradise that resembles a sunlit river valley, but also, it seems, a labyrinthine office filled with paperwork, judges, and the quiet shuffling of souls awaiting their turn. Now, standing on the periphery of the living and the dead, you piece together the stories, the strange, dusty facts about what supposedly awaits beyond the tomb. The ancient Egyptians imagined the next world not as an endless vacation, but as a complicated system of checkpoints and celestial forms, each more confusing than the last. At the center sits Osiris, god of the underworld, green-skinned and serene, presiding over a tribunal of 42 judges, each with a long list of rules. Your master, once so skilled at circumventing earthly bureaucracy, must now present himself, hoping his paperwork, his heart, his confessions, his ritual cleanliness will suffice. You picture the weighing of the heart, the most famous test of all. Anubis, jackal-headed, gently lifts your master's heart and places it on one side of the golden scale. On the other, the feather of Ma'at, the essence of truth. Your master, who never liked surprises, must stand silent as the scales tip. If the heart is heavier than the feather, Amit, the devourer, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, waits hungrily nearby. If the heart is light, he will join the ranks of the justified, free to stroll the eternal fields, harvesting wheat, drinking cool water, surrounded by friends and family who never argue and always remember his best stories. It all sounds reassuring in a bureaucratic sort of way. There are forms to fill, declarations to sign, appeals to make if you are unlucky enough to have stumbled in life. The Book of the Dead, a sort of spiritual instruction manual, is tucked beside your master's mummy, It's spells ready to be recited or, at the very least, mumbled in the right order. You find it deeply ironic that after a lifetime of cleverness and cunning, your master's fate depends on a book he probably never bothered to read. You have learned that the afterlife is filled with dangers as well as delights. There are crocodiles in the river, serpents in the reeds, mysterious gates guarded by beings with names like He Who Eats Shadows and She Who Dances in Darkness. Each obstacle demands a password or a secret name, a ritual phrase that opens the way, the right words, the right spells. These are the currency of eternity. You wonder, as you so often do, if the gods are truly all powerful or simply fond of watching mortals try to keep up with the endless paperwork. Interesting facts accumulate as you wander the edges of the myth. In some stories, the blessed dead are given tasks in the afterlife, not too different from the ones they performed in life. They plow the fields, tend the herds, bring offerings to the gods. There are even little Shabti figurines tucked in the tomb, each inscribed with a promise to do your master's work for him should he be called upon. Your master, who prized delegation above all, would likely have approved. In the bureaucracy of eternity, it seems, outsourcing is still in fashion. The priests spoke of all this with a mixture of fear and hope. The afterlife is a place of endless opportunity, but also of endless scrutiny. The soul is judged, questioned, sometimes tricked, sometimes rewarded. You imagine a great hall filled with the murmur of waiting souls, all clutching their book of the dead, glancing nervously at the door where the next judgment awaits. It is not so different from a court or an office back in the world above, just with a little more gold, a little more shadow, and rather more animal heads. You find yourself reflecting on your own life, your own invisible heart weighed on the scales. What spells have you learned? What passwords might you forget? You hope, quietly, that the gods are as easily distracted as the living, that a well timed compliment or a clever joke might buy you a few extra moments in paradise, or at least a lighter heart. The mythology of the afterlife is, in the end, a story about longing for justice, for comfort, for an answer to the question of what happens when the stone settles and the torches go out. It is an elaborate system, part hope, part threat, part cosmic bureaucracy. The dead, you realize, are not so different from the living. They wait, they worry, they prepare, and they rely on the kindness, or at least the efficiency, of those who hold the keys to the next stage. In your mind's eye, you see your master, no longer stiff and silent, but striding confidently through the celestial corridors, Book of the Dead under one arm, ready to argue his case before the gods. You hope he finds the right words. You hope the paperwork is in order. You hope, above all, that there is someone waiting for him on the other side. A familiar face, a friendly voice, a reminder that even in the endless office of the afterlife, no one is truly alone. You leave the tomb with these images lingering in your mind, a procession of souls, a hall of judges, a world built of hope and rules, and the stubborn human desire for meaning. The silence outside is softer now, as if the air itself has been emptied of expectation. Behind you, the tomb sleeps. Ahead, life resumes its uneven course. And somewhere, in the bureaucracy of eternity, your master's name is being called. There is a myth, carefully cultivated by the living, that tombs are sanctuaries, sealed, inviolate, places where the dead can rest undisturbed for all eternity. You know better. The world outside the tomb does not wait long before remembering the value hidden inside. And so, inevitably, there comes a night, whether it is days, years, or centuries after the burial, when the first visitors return, not to mourn, but to take. You are there, unseen as always, the watcher pressed to the cold stone, when the silence of centuries is broken by the scuff of sandals, the low mutter of voices, and the telltale glint of a torch in the darkness. The tomb robbers arrive not with reverence, but with calculation. Their steps are cautious, not for fear of the dead, but for the traps left by the living. One of them runs his fingers over the painted hieroglyphs, lips moving as he calculates which treasures lie within. Another eyes the sealed entrance, already picturing the golden mask, the jewels, the fine linen, the precious jars that surely wait beyond. They do not look back. The past does not concern them. What matters is the promise of wealth, the flicker of gold in lamplight, the weight of silver, the value of amulets that once were prayers. They whisper, squabble, and then, with hands already filthy, begin to work the stones loose from the sealed door. The tomb resists at first, its blocks heavy, its mortar stubborn, but patience and greed are powerful tools, and soon the stone gives way with a groan that seems almost alive. Interesting facts parade through your mind, half formed and ironic. Tomb robbing was, in ancient times, a profession with its own tools, codes, and risks. There were even punishments prescribed in scrolls: amputations, floggings, impalement, though few robbers ever saw the inside of a courtroom. The tombs themselves evolved in response: false doors, decoy chambers, curses carved in red ochre, all meant to terrify the desperate and the greedy. Yet, for every precaution, there was always someone hungrier, bolder, or simply unlucky. The intruders move inside, eyes wide, breath held. The darkness swallows them, their torchlight painting jittery shapes on the wall. They pause at the first sight of painted figures, your master and his family, the gods, the fields of the next world, and, for a moment, you wonder if they feel any awe. One of them spits on the ground, muttering that the dead do not need these things, that the living always do. There is a logic in this that is hard to deny. You watch as they pick over the offerings, the food, the furniture, the painted wooden animals. Some items are discarded, too fragile, too common, not worth the trouble of carrying home. Others are pocketed, wrapped in cloth, or slipped quietly into bags. At the foot of the sarcophagus, the lead robber pauses, listening for the angry mutter of ghosts, the snap of a trap. But the tomb, already robbed by time, offers only silence. The greatest prize is always the same: the coffin, the mask, the jewelry hidden on the body. You flinch as they pry open the lid, breaking the ancient seal, ignoring the curses etched in careful lines along the rim. The mask is lifted, its gold dull in the weak light, and passed from hand to hand, weighed not for its meaning, but for its melt value. One robber, bolder or more foolish than the rest, snatches an amulet from the chest, snickering as he pockets 1,000 years of hope. There is no grandeur in the theft, no grand pronouncements, no poetic revenge from beyond the grave. There is only the hurried scraping of loot into sacks, the nervous glances at the dark, and the soft, panicked breathing of men who know that time is not on their side. You feel a surge of anger, not so much for your master, who surely no longer cares, but for the waste of it all, the breaking of faith, the end of a promise, the old ritual undone by hunger and fear. The robbers do not linger. They leave behind chaos, a maskless mummy, offerings spilled and broken, jars upended, prayers scattered like debris. Their torch flickers out as they vanish into the night, the tomb left colder and emptier than before. You remain, witness to the aftermath. The silence returns, but it is changed, torn, wounded, uncertain. The painted figures on the walls look out over a scene of desolation. The amulets, stripped from the linen, are nothing but empty shells, robbed of meaning as well as matter. Even the air is different. The old scent of resin and cedar replaced by the rank odor of sweat and fear. Interesting facts return, bitter as ashes. Some tombs were robbed so soon after burial that the family never had a chance to mourn. Others were rediscovered centuries later, their treasures already gone, their stories left for archaeologists and thieves to decipher. A handful survived untouched, secrets kept by chance and sand. But all tombs, in the end, are vulnerable to the hands of the living, because nothing, not even death, is beyond the reach of need. You think of your master, now stripped of his golden face, his journey interrupted, his armor of wealth and ritual pierced by greed. What comfort can there be for the dead when even the promise of eternal rest can be broken by a chisel and a little patience? What meaning remains when the symbols of hope are traded for coin in a noisy marketplace? You leave the tomb. There is nothing left to watch, but the shadows remain, whispering of loss and futility, of stories unmade and dreams betrayed. And above, eternity waits, unimpressed, watching as the cycle repeats. Life, death, burial, theft, and silence once more. Perhaps you think this is the only true lesson the tomb can offer, that nothing endures unchanged, that even in the heart of stone, the world is restless. You step into the light, feeling the chill of the violated dark on your skin, and know that you too are changed, another witness marked by the things that could not be kept. You once believed that eternity must be dramatic, an endless series of battles, divine judgments, and miraculous reunions. But as the days and centuries unspool in silence, you discover a far less glamorous truth. Eternity is boring, not the pleasant boredom of a lazy afternoon, but the deep, aching monotony that only the dead and those who watch them can truly understand. It begins at midnight, which is no different from noon or dusk in the sealed tomb. The darkness is total, pressing against your senses, and the only measure of time is the slow settling of dust, the gradual cooling of stone. If your master is still present, somewhere inside the wrappings and spells, he gives no sign. Perhaps he is dreaming, though the dreams of a mummy are surely stranger and lonelier than those of the living. You have heard stories told by priests and merchants, repeated by children in the half light, that the dead are busy in their afterlife. They harvest endless fields, attend feasts, argue with gods, sail the night river in splendid boats. But here, in the real tomb, there is none of that. There is only the muffled passage of days, a routine so unchanging it could drive even the most patient soul to distraction. Your master's daily life is mapped in dust, the ceiling painted with distant stars, the walls crowded with scenes of feasts and games, the offerings moldering quietly in their baskets. You imagine him waking each day, if days exist here, to the same sights: the golden mask, now stolen, but memory is stubborn, the painted family forever smiling, the gods staring with unfathomable patience. Perhaps he conducts a silent inventory, ticking off what remains: bread, crumbled, beer, sour, amulets, gone, company. Not unless you count the occasional mouse. What does a mummy do all day? The answer you find is nothing, or rather, nothing that makes any difference. You watch as the hours pass with no event, no purpose, no interruption. The priests promised eternal rest, but never warned how tedious rest can be when it is truly without end. The living must struggle and work, argue and love, but the dead have only waiting, a waiting so complete it becomes almost a form of meditation. You imagine your master, always restless in life, trying to assert order in the tomb. Perhaps he attempts to issue commands. You there, clean the sarcophagus, rearrange the offerings, paint another boat on the wall. But his voice, like all voices here, is lost in the thick silence. The painted servants remain frozen in their duties. The real ones are dust. The only reply is the soft fall of sand, the faint groan of shifting stone, the occasional tremor as the earth itself remembers its long forgotten dead. Interesting facts nudge at the edge of your awareness. Some cultures believed that the soul traveled each night, facing trials and monsters, returning at dawn. The ancient Egyptians left little Shabti dolls, servants to perform tasks in the afterlife, should labor be required. But for most, eternity is simply this: an endless procession of sameness, the tedium of immortality under a roof of stone. There are moments when you almost wish for excitement, for a spirit to wail, for a ghostly light to flicker, for a forgotten curse to crack open the wall and let something happen. But these moments pass. The dead are, above all, patient. Your master, once the center of every room, is now the center of nothing, and the world turns on without him. From time to time, intrusions break the routine: robbers, rodents, the slow encroachment of mold. These moments are brief, unpleasant, and soon forgotten. Most of eternity is spent in perfect stillness, a tableau of waiting so complete that even hope fades. The treasures of the tomb lose their luster, the painted stories flake away, and memory itself becomes a hollow habit, repeated out of reflex rather than longing. You realize that the greatest enemy of the dead is not violence or theft, but boredom. The priests never warned about that. The old stories never sang songs of it. Boredom is the true eternity, the quiet hum beneath all ritual and promise, the slow erasure of personality, ambition, and even regret. You, the watcher, feel it too. You start to count things: cracks in the wall, layers of dust, the silent ticks of your own heart. You imagine speaking to your master, inventing conversations to pass the endless hours. Remember the market? Remember the old house? Remember the time you laughed? But the silence swallows every word, as if the tomb itself cannot bear the weight of nostalgia. Sometimes you think eternity must have a sense of humor. Here lies a man who once wanted everything, who feared missing out, who dreamed of living forever, and now he has gotten his wish in the most literal, least satisfying way possible. There is no ending, no climax, no release, only the long, unbroken silence of a story without a final line. You wonder, as the centuries stretch on, if anything will change, if the tomb will crack and sunlight will flood in, if archaeologists will arrive to marvel and disrupt, if a new family will bury their dead here, adding another layer to the endless cycle. But for now, the routine endures, undisturbed and unremarkable. The mummy lies still, the watcher waits, the dust gathers. Eternity, it turns out, is less a reward than a sentence, a dull, steady beat that outlasts hope, fear, and even memory. And still, in the heart of that silence, you listen, you observe, you wait, because someone must. Boredom breeds mischief, even in the halls of eternity. You find yourself wandering the tomb's close air and shadowed corners, your thoughts looping with the same phrases and regrets, until you begin to notice the things that have always been there, waiting. It is a strange comfort in this place designed to last forever, to find evidence that the past still reaches out to the future, not with grand monuments, but with secrets small enough to fit in a folded scrap of linen, a scratch behind a painted figure, a word carved where only the truly bored or desperate might look. The tomb is full of messages. Some are grand and public, the rows of painted prayers on the wall, the long winded boasts of your master's accomplishments, the endless promises of gods and fields of plenty. These, are meant for anyone who comes, a declaration of worth, an advertisement for the afterlife, a hope that the world will remember who this person was and why they mattered. But beneath these, hidden in the cracks and seams, are other messages, personal, strange, sometimes defiant. The private graffiti of eternity. You discover the first of these secrets by accident, your finger trailing along the base of a painted pillar. The hieroglyphs here are smaller, messier, less concerned with beauty than with survival. If you find this, know that I was here, reads one. Another, almost invisible, tucked behind a crumbling brick. My brother was the best painter. Remember him. These are not the official voices of priests and nobles, but the quiet testimony of workers, children, even thieves, anyone with a scrap of time and a bit of sharpened bone. You begin to search for more, developing an eye for the places where secrets are likely to hide. Inside the folds of a linen shroud, under the foot of a carved statue, on the unlit edge of a painted scene. The messages vary in tone. Some are hopeful, may my family prosper. Some are desperate. Forgive me, I took only what I needed. And some are jokes that would be at home in any crowded marketplace. The overseer smells worse than the embalming room. Osiris knows how to sleep, but he cannot sing. Interesting facts crowd your thoughts. It was common for tomb builders and decorators to leave their names, not on the main walls, but in secret corners, sometimes as a mark of pride, sometimes as a ward against being forgotten. Others hid warnings or curses, not for robbers, but for lazy descendants. If you neglect my tomb, the river will turn from you. There are prayers for rain, pleas for mercy, blessings for children never met, and generations still unborn. You find yourself tracing these small inscriptions, reading them aloud in a whisper, half expecting the walls to answer. In their secrecy, these messages are heartbreakingly human. Unlike the official records, full of arrogance and ritual, these notes are reminders of doubt, hope, and the small, stubborn wish to be remembered not as a legend, but as a person. You realize, with a pang, that for all the effort spent to preserve the mummy, the mask, the painted stories, it is these hidden messages that feel the most alive. Occasionally, you find a message meant for the truly distant future, a kind of time capsule for archaeologists or gods. If you read this, tell my story. Do not believe the priests. I loved my wife. This tomb is empty. We moved the treasure. Beware the jackal-faced spirit in the west wall. You smile, half wishing you could reply, to reassure the writer that their words have survived, even if their face and name have long faded. You remember your master, who was obsessed with legacy, who demanded monuments and statues, who believed that immortality meant being seen by many. But you suspect now that immortality is quieter, more accidental. It hides in margins and dust, in the joke scratched behind a pillar or the sigh pressed into linen. It is the kind of memory that does not need a monument, only a single pair of eyes willing to look. You reflect on your own urge to leave a mark. You think about what message you would write if you dared. Would you confess your fears, boast about your insights, or simply say, I was here, I watched, I waited? It is not a grand message, but perhaps that is the point. To be present, to be real, even in the long shadow of eternity. The tomb remains silent, but you feel less alone, knowing that others before you left their voices behind. The official prayers and painted glories will fade, as all things do, but in the cracks and shadows, in ink and scratched stone, the quiet chorus of the forgotten will persist. waiting for a curious eye, a gentle touch, a reader in some unimaginable future. And as you press your hand to the cool stone, you add your own silent message to the chorus. Remember us. We were here too. Centuries have no respect for secrets. The world outside the tomb has changed 1,000 times. Rulers and dynasties rising and falling, sand swallowing roads, cities migrating along the banks of rivers, entire languages dissolving into dust. Yet the tomb, quiet and expectant, has waited beneath it all. If the dead can dream, perhaps your master has dreamt of this moment, the day the door opens once again and light, real light, pours inside. It does not arrive quietly. First, there is the clatter of tools, the scrape of metal on stone, the excited shouts echoing down corridors where only whispers have lingered for centuries. The darkness, patient and jealous, recoils as torch beams slash across painted walls and gilded masks. You watch from your invisible vantage, equal parts curious and resentful, as the new intruders descend. These visitors not guided by greed, but by the hungers of science, ambition, and the peculiar thrill of discovery. The archaeologists come in teams, armed not with curses or chisels, but with notebooks, cameras, delicate brushes, and a staggering belief in their own mission. They speak to one another in languages your master never heard, their words crisp with authority, soft with wonder. They wear strange clothes, pith helmets, heavy boots, spectacles that gleam in the lamplight. They mutter to each other about stratigraphy, carbon dates, dynastic sequences, and the likelihood of finding pristine remains. Yet their excitement is as old as the tomb itself. You recognize the awe in their faces as they enter the burial chamber, pausing before the wall paintings, fingers hovering just above the surface. Some whisper prayers to gods they do not believe in. Others simply stare, wide-eyed and silent, at the artistry and ambition of a world that should not still exist. They are careful, but they are also relentless. The tomb is measured, mapped, cataloged. Every scrap of linen, every amulet, every grain of dust is documented, boxed, sent away for further study. Your master, or what is left of him, is treated as both a specimen and a celebrity. The mummy is x-rayed, measured, probed, described in detail: height, approximate age, causes of death, the fractures, the abscesses, the illnesses that no amount of gold or prayer could heal. The golden mask, if it remains, is photographed from every angle. The names are read aloud, sometimes mangled, sometimes reverent, as if speaking them could bring the long dead back to life, if only for a moment. You cannot help but find irony in the archaeologists' reverence. They are here to preserve the past, to honor the dead, yet their curiosity is as invasive as any tomb robbers. The offerings are taken away for analysis, the wall paintings illuminated by new, electric light that fades colors meant only for the darkness. Dust is swept, cataloged, then reintroduced as an exhibit somewhere far from home. The tomb is opened to visitors, tourists and scholars who marvel, point, and sigh, snapping photographs to be forgotten in boxes or digital archives. Interesting facts gather in your mind, now tinged with the humor of the hopelessly outdated. Archaeology itself is a kind of ritual, painstaking, ceremonial, obsessed with detail. It, too, has its own priests and sacred texts, its own heresies and revelations. The archaeologists promise not to disturb, but their every action is disturbance. What they cannot catalog, they speculate about. What they cannot preserve, they reconstruct with guesses and glue. You see the old secrets uncovered, graffiti revealed beneath paint, hidden messages deciphered at last. A scholar smiles, reading the scribe's long ago plea, "Remember my brother." Another, brow furrowed, tries to translate the curse meant to keep robbers at bay. No one is turned to stone, no one struck by divine lightning. Instead, the tomb's story is folded into new books, retold on museum plaques, discussed in classrooms, where the names of the dead live on in a language they never spoke. There is tragedy here, but also a strange triumph. The tomb, once a place of rigid exclusion, is now open, exposed, shared with the world. Your master, who so feared being forgotten, is remembered not as a living man, but as a specimen, a legend, a cautionary tale. The priest's prayers for secrecy have failed, but their prayers for memory, against all odds, have succeeded. You too are changed. The silence that once pressed on you is gone, replaced by the endless murmur of visitors, the scrape of feet and voices, the flicker of flash bulbs. The tomb is not what it was, but it is not empty. The story of your master and of those who watched and waited is told again and again, woven into the great tapestry of history. In this new kind of eternity, there is no rest, but there is, at least, recognition. The archaeologists leave with their notebooks full and their faces smudged with dust. The tomb settles once more, changed but stubbornly itself. As you linger in the doorway, you wonder what your master would think. Would he rage against the intrusion? Or would he, in some quiet, secret corner of his soul, take pride in being seen, named, and, after all these centuries, still remembered? You step back into the shadows as the last torch dims. The tomb is open, the world is watching, and eternity has found a new pair of eyes. You thought eternity was an endless, empty hallway, a corridor lined with silence, broken only by the sound of your own thoughts echoing back at you. But now, after centuries of darkness, ritual, disturbance, and rediscovery, you understand that eternity is not a place at all, but a gaze, an unbroken look that outlives all its subjects, an eye that never closes, always searching, always remembering and forgetting by turns. The tomb is no longer what it was. The walls, once bright with scenes of paradise and gods, are faded, colors muted by the harsh light of modern curiosity. The offerings are gone, some scattered to museums, others turned to dust or stolen by robbers centuries ago. Your master, once the center of every prayer and procession, is now a catalog entry, a photograph in 1,000 books, a file in a database maintained by scholars who speak of him in tones of academic detachment and professional awe. And yet, for all this change, something remains. In the quiet moments after the archaeologists have gone, when the latest round of tourists have left only footprints and the desert wind sighs through the open door, you sense that the tomb still remembers, not in the way the living remember, with tears or stories, laughter or regret, but in the slow geological memory of stone. Every scratch on the wall, every faded figure, every layer of dust is a record of what has been lost and what stubbornly endures. You walk through the chamber, tracing the path you first walked so long ago, before the wrappings, before the priests, before the long silence that followed. You remember the feeling of being watched by your master, by the priests, by the gods painted on the wall, by the unblinking gold of the funerary mask. Now you realize it was eternity all along, watching through every pair of eyes. The tomb is a theater, and every visitor, living or dead, plays a part in a story whose end is always postponed. You look at what remains of your master: bones, wrappings, fragments of a mask, the faint outline of a name on the wall, and wonder if this is what immortality really is. Not a perfect preservation, not a triumphant resurrection, but an endless retelling. His story has been rewritten 1,000 times by priests, by robbers, by grieving descendants, by scholars, by you. Each version erases something, adds something, distorts or clarifies according to the teller's needs. In the end, no version is final. All are true, and all are false. Interesting facts drift through your mind, their edges blunted by time. The ancient Egyptians called the West the land of the dead because it was where the sun disappeared. They imagined the afterlife as a mirror of the world they knew, complete with fields, families, bureaucracy, and the possibility of being forgotten if the right rituals were not observed. They were right in a way. The true terror is not death, but oblivion, the slow fading of names, faces, voices, until only the unseeing gaze of eternity remains. You wonder what future eyes will make of this place. Perhaps the tomb will collapse and be swallowed by sand, its secrets safe for another 1,000 years. Perhaps new explorers, with new technology and new questions, will come to puzzle over the same bones, the same faded prayers, the same silent mask. Perhaps your master's story will be retold once more, shaped by the fashions and fears of a world not yet imagined. The cycle will continue because this is the only real immortality the world offers, to be seen, even imperfectly, by those who come after. You realize now that you are part of this cycle. Your own presence, your observations, your doubts, your quiet attention has become another layer in the history of the tomb. You have watched as your master was prepared, mourned, wrapped, buried, robbed, remembered, and displayed. You have seen the rituals repeated, the silence broken and restored, the paintings fade and be revived under alien light. You have borne witness not only to the death of a man, but to the slow transformation of memory into myth. You look one last time at the empty chamber, The faces on the walls, once sharp and bright, are now little more than smudges. The air is dry, heavy with centuries of sighs and unspoken words. The last gaze of eternity is upon you, unforgiving, impartial, oddly intimate. It is not the gaze of a god or a king, but of time itself, seeing everything and nothing at once. You step back, your own shadow falling across the floor. You understand, finally, that there is no escape from this gaze. The dead, the living, the watcher, the watched, all are caught in the same endless cycle. Stories begin, stories end, and in between, eternity looks on, amused and unmoved, through the eyes of the dead. And so the cycle is complete. The tomb closes, the dust settles, and the gaze of eternity waits, unblinking, for the next story to begin.